So just for everyone obviously sitting in the audience, this is going to be a bit of a what we call a fireside chat in conversation with Mel and Ruth, looking at levelling up and the skills and their perspectives on that. And also we will jump in if we have time for some questions to the audience from yourselves.
Thanks so much for inviting me along here today. Since, for those of you who don't know me, obviously I'm the candidate at the next general election. I was previously elected as a Member of Parliament, and since I left Parliament in 2019, I've been working in the renewable sector with the National Trade Organisation, but more recently have been working focused on the Humber region in renewables and the marine and maritime sector. And there is so much conversation amongst civic society, leaders, business operatives on really maximising the potential that exists in this area, and an increasing amount, I would say, of mild frustration, because I think people see all of the key assets that we have got in the area, economically and socially, and for some reason getting them tied together and reaching the masses and a sense of positivity growing around the area has been a real struggle, and that is not for want of really enthusiastic and talented people trying. So trying to identify what those blockers are is something that I'm really, really passionate about. Obviously with my more recent background in renewables, I really want to see the area embrace everything that comes along with all of the new energy investment that is happening, the decarbonisation projects, and making sure that people in the area get the benefit of those new industries, and make sure that we expand those industries as much as we possibly can. And hopefully that fits in quite well with Ruth.
I'm Ruth Carver. I'm the Chief Exec of the Greater Lincolnshire LEP. So my job role is completely about all of the economy, and I lead teams that are focused on skills and innovation and cluster work and policy and delivery across the Greater Lincolnshire area. And I think, I'm a member of the Humber Energy Board, so, really kind of focused on the energy sector as a growing cluster. But I'm really concerned about kind of progress and lack of progress, and particularly competing progress across the country. If we think about kind of our opposite numbers, I suppose, in Teesside, and some of the advances that they've made in attracting other inward investments and really setting out their shop window in what they can do. And I think, I genuinely think, because the Humber's got a highest amount of emissions and got significant amount of decarbonisation to achieve, and the UK cannot achieve its net zero targets without decarbonising the Humber, and they are. But equally, there is pretty much every single bit of the energy system in the Humber. When I think about offshore wind, and you think about hydrogen or geothermal or solar, all of those, there's many more, but all of those elements sit within the Humber, where this massive kind of microcosm, I suppose, of the UK's energy needs. And I think if you get it right in the Humber, you can then start to think about how you can get it right elsewhere.
And that leads on very nicely. Thank you, ladies. It's like we planned this and we really didn't. So going back to your point, obviously, as you said, Mel, it's identifying the blockers. And you've just mentioned, Ruth, about getting it right and what is it right. So on that basis, looking at levelling up in the region and your role as the LEP with working on these businesses, what are those blockers and how do we level up? What are the businesses saying that they need?
So obviously the energy sector is just one of the sectors that I cover, because in the Greater Lincolnshire and as indeed the Humber has many other kind of sectors. So in terms of what businesses are saying specifically, they are saying that the Humber and Lincolnshire is a place that has traditionally been underinvested in, and particularly in terms of infrastructure and energy infrastructure. Business often say, don't they, we can do our part in that kind of market development, but the things that we can't do is coming together for the large-scale infrastructure. And I don't always mean roads by that. I particularly in the Humber mean a pipeline, a long talked about pipeline to capture hydrogen and capture carbon is, a consistent ask, I think, from a number, many of the energy companies around the Humber area. So large-scale investment in terms of infrastructure is really important. And I would say the right type of infrastructure within Lincolnshire, we're having a current discussion about pylons across our beautiful kind of country side. It's an important issue that we think about the right type of infrastructure and that benefits our communities locally. So businesses really want you to do the big stuff. They also want you to do and work with them on the pre-competitive stuff, which often is what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, which is about long-term approach to skills and talent management and understanding and forecasting where universities and colleges can help in training those people for the future, inspiring schools, etc., etc. So they still remain the two major issues that businesses talk about in terms of the sector.
And what is their consensus on the skills part of this? And obviously Mel can come into play here with her hat on with the experience of like the skills gap within offshore, for example. Like what are they saying there?
Yeah, in terms of skills, I mean, lots of businesses talk about younger people and preparing them for work. But there is a very tight labour market in the Humber. There's a very tight labour market across Lincolnshire. And it is often about inspiring young people for the future, but also retraining your existing workforces. And there isn't enough money that goes into, at a national level, to retraining your workforce of the future. Some of the things that we deliver, and then, you know, I'm sure you deliver in the Humber around skills boot camps, you know, these 16-week retraining courses. But a lot of effort needs to go into that. And businesses say at the moment that the skills gap is, there's currently a skills gap, but in the future that skills gap is going to get more and more acute. And in particularly for this area, it's going to be focused on heavy industry. So you may be thinking about technical level 3 or 4, you may be thinking about the so-called green jobs, and that could be, you know, welders, that could be technicians, project managers, data analysts. It's all technically-ish kind of trades, and there already is a gap, and the forecasts say that that gap is going to get worse. So what businesses want us to do is to coordinate that, to work with them to see what opportunities there can be for local people to get involved in these new industries, but also how we can inspire the future generations to get involved in these sectors.
And what are those local opportunities, you think, Melanie?
Well, I mean, I think there is another role for, you know, maybe the LEPs, Chamber and industry kind of working together in actually pulling together some of the key data around workforces. I mean, there is an industry, the Offshore Wind Industry Council every year produce a document looking at skills and jobs in the sector. But of course that's very narrow because it's just about offshore wind, and quite a lot of work goes into it. It's based on data that comes directly from companies. Having something like that, you know, on behalf of the whole region that we could break down by sector, I think would be really helpful. Because, I mean, in that offshore wind sector, I have got a list. I made of it when I was thinking off the top of my head about the opportunities for young people or retrainers in the region. Anything electrical and engineering for substations, high voltage, less so in our area, but cables as well. Broad skills around project management, broad skills around health and safety, anybody who's doing stuff on data analytics, more kind of futuristically, a bit of AI, a bit of robotics, which is all very exciting, a bit of software development, on and offshore logistics, which actually could be easily transferred from lots of the industry that we've already got in the area, and marine and port skills. And those are identified and have been identified for probably the last 2 or 3 years as things that we know we currently have a bit of a gap in, as well as a shortage. And, you know, looking at the potential for the region, I think Yorkshire and Humber has got something like about 5,000 jobs associated with offshore wind alone. If we start looking at that more broadly across the energy sector, including the CCUS projects, including biofuel, including the oil refineries that we've got. I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are employed in this sector. As we start to migrate some of these jobs, I mean, even those refinery jobs will end up being termed as green jobs as we start to decarbonise the operations that they are fulfilling. So, you know, across the whole country, looking at 480,000 skilled green jobs by 2030 is a huge opportunity. Linking our education providers really closely to that expectation, I think, is something that has been happening actually for some time. But the degrees at which either the understanding from the providers has been, in terms of the industry and the expectation from industry, perhaps has not been strong enough, so those relationships need to be strengthened. Or just in terms of FE in particular, looking at college, I don't want to go into masses there, but college funding is really, really challenging. And so we're seeing quite a lot of apprenticeships, for example, moving into other providers away from colleges, when for lots and lots of young people that will be their first port of call, because the threshold for apprenticeships is getting ever higher. So college is where they're going, but they're struggling to recruit people who have got the necessary knowledge to provide the support into business. So I think there's a huge amount really that can work in cooperation and partnership between industry, the education sector, and then providing some of that core critical information, because if I talk to the education providers, they'll say we might be training all of these young people, or we might be engaging in retraining activities, but we are not sure, we're not clear what we're training them for and when those jobs are going to appear. Then that comes down to some of the, is the government taking enough action on decarbonisation? Some of those timelines and expectations being fulfilled around timing, I think is absolutely critical, because businesses don't want to invest unless they know that they've got clarity on policy. Education cannot train people for jobs that they don't know are going to exist, because you don't want to set young people up for failure. So, a lot of these things have got to work together, and that only works if there are good and strong relationships at a local level, but also with a listening ear from government.
I think it's a really good point. We've touched on quite a lot about the younger generation, but also a couple of times both of you have mentioned reskilling, because there's an existing workforce out there that can be reskilled and retrained. And to bring up the white elephant in the room, so to speak, Scunthorpe, part of the decarbonisation, is actually 2,000 plus jobs potentially at risk. So, what is there a solution of taking those 2,000 people, and how can we phase them and reskill them into the new energy sectors for decarbonisation? What ideas do you think there are that could be done, or what needs to be done around identifying opportunities like that, so we don't lose 2,000 expert skilled traders?
Shall I go first?
Anyone? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a massive point actually, and as we start to see shifts in our energy production, moving to cleaner methods, and it will change the workforce, making sure that we have a fair transition for working people and communities is absolutely essential. I think, when it comes to Scunthorpe and the steel, I don't think that we've really cracked exactly what it is that we're doing with UK Steel. And it's fine talking about moving to electric arc furnaces. I think that capacity for what we currently produce in the country limits the number of electric arc furnaces that we actually require. There are issues again about the size of the electric arc furnaces, how much space they take up, and of course it requires fewer people than the traditional methodology. But if we were to say, there's been a supply chain report out again for offshore wind that talks about what we could do in terms of manufacturing. All of this is kind of predicated around the fact we haven't really got a solid industrial strategy. It's quite piecemeal around the country. It's kind of focused on who puts a bid in, usually via mayors. So it's not really very coordinated, I don't think, from the centre. If we have got that, really thinking about what can we use UK Steel for? What do we want to use UK Steel for? There is £100 billion worth of opportunity for steel on fabrication projects for offshore wind alone. It doesn't make any sense to me if we can make that in the UK that we import it from elsewhere. So, having some kind of confidence that government is interested in manufacturing towers, for example, I think would be the boost that it needs. And then, the retraining is limited, because I think that one of the other things is, if you've got 2,000 potential job losses, if people are living in and around the area, the risk is that they have to leave that area to go and find other work, which is less than ideal. And we've seen the impact of that on other communities once they've been hollowed out. So taking action early and actually having a plan in place, I think, would be quite helpful.
I guess I'm not going to comment on either the current government or a future government's policy on steel. However, we do need an industrial strategy. I think both parties kind of agree that we do need a detailed industrial strategy. I think bringing it back down to Scunthorpe and people and jobs, there is an ageing workforce involved in the steel industry regardless, and the numbers are quite terrifying actually. So no, there isn't a huge amount of people going into steel. So there'll be, there might be a natural kind of churn of some degree, but other things that you can do probably apply to all kind of sectors really, because what you've really got to do in a very tight labour market is really pinpoint those groups, whether that's females, whether that's retrainers, whether that's people who are working with DWP. You've literally got to kind of flood the market in terms of retraining and have a very focused intervention that will take them through particular programmes. I think that's just, that requires funds, and that requires colleges and other providers, of which we've got a lot, to really kind of put a big effort into this. And they often do that when there is as a so-called economic shock, as we've had with Scunthorpe and Steel a number of times, and that's often a reactionary thing as a result of the economic shock. I think what there hasn't been is something that is much more proactive over a 2, 3, 4, whatever it takes year periods to kind of really recognise where the opportunities are. But then that does come back to government policy, government certainty, infrastructure, commitments, and also the businesses themselves being pretty clear about what skills and what jobs they need and when. So all of those things, as Mel said before, have to all come together to make this kind of system work, don't they?
Indeed.
And I'm not surprised that there's not a younger workforce going in, because steel has just been so inconsistent and so unsure for such a long time, whereas it once was a job for life for so many men, 2, 3 generations of men in families going into the steel industry. As soon as it became less certain and there were bailouts and different companies taking it over, name changes, that certainty was lost, and people didn't want to put their faith in something they didn't think was going to be there in 3, 4, 5 years' time.
Yeah, and it's a pretty good point made. We do have you just for 5 more minutes, and I just wondered if there was anyone in the audience had a dying question that they wanted to ask quickly.
Are we doing one at a time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I have seen some cooperative programs that have been established that have been really, really effective. It tends to take somebody quite senior, whether that is a cabinet minister or government minister, kind of cajoling everybody to kind of forget a little bit about their own personal company interest, to think a bit bigger about things. So I think that has been very successful. I don't think that's the only model, and what we have got to do in this region, though, is stop creating new organisations. We've got to stop creating, Corrine knows that this is a bugbear of mine because they pop up and they've got new similar names to the one that was before and I can't remember who's on it. But there are so many organisations trying to represent the whole area, and actually having, bringing those people together and having a single group of people who are already experts. We don't need experts really to come from anywhere else. We've got people who are living and breathing both the area and the industry. They understand our local economy. They understand our local people perfectly well, and they have got good ideas. And I think, just having a single body where all of those representatives are kind of there to focus on a programme. Some of the direction, though, does need to come from some leadership of people who have got ability to access the levers. And it might not be a politician. It could be, you know, like the LEPs, for example, the Chamber, for example. You know, there are people who have got connections into some of those kind of broader government levers to help define the direction. They can work. You know, we have got other structures. We are expecting, of course, you know, mayoral structures to come in the next couple of years in this area. So, you know, that will be a challenge. I think Ruth and I have had a bit of a chat about this previously. You know, the current structure of Greater Lincolnshire and Humber and East Yorkshire, potentially, Hull and East Yorkshire, you know, potentially has its challenges. But yeah, just being able to properly bring people together and have a clear agenda and making sure that those meetings do not drop, that they are on a regular cycle, that they have got a proper agenda, that they have an operational working group approach, because that can be challenging for people who are participating, because it can become like another job. But having some support around it, you know, just it does drive things forward. You know, I've seen it happen in other areas, and you know, it just allows people to be quite upfront and straightforward about what it is that we're trying to achieve, without worrying that, you know, they're breaking company line as much as anything.
Thank you both very, very much for your time, and that was really very interesting, some great points made.